Welcome everyone to the Human Anatomy and Physiology class for the B.Pharm first year. Myself, Victor Roychowdhury, Assistant Professor of Department of Pharmaceutical Technology of JISU University, and today we'll be discussing about the basic life process. So after we finish this class, the student will learn about the basic concept of the basic life process. Then they will have a concept on the homeostasis, the control of homeostasis, and the imbalances of the homeostasis. So these are the contents that we'll be discussing in this lecture. First, we'll be discussing about on the basic life process. Then there will be some few questions on it. Then there will be we'll be discussing about the homeostasis, the control of homeostasis. Then the feedback systems, that is the negative feedback system and the positive feedback system. Then we will again have some questions, and then we'll be finally moving on to the homeostatic imbalances, and then we'll conclude this class, and finally we'll have some questions regarding this whole chapter. So to begin with, we can say that certain process distinguish organism or living things from non-living things. Now, uh, there will be six most important life processes of human body. The first one is metabolism. So metabolism is the sum of all the chemical process that occur in the body. One phase of metabolism is catabolism. Uh, that is, the breakdown of complex chemical substance into the simpler components. The other phase of metabolism is the anabolism, which is the building up of complex chemical substance from smaller, simpler complexes. Now, for example, if we take digestive processes, catabolize, that is, splits proteins in foods into amino acids. Now, these amino acids then then used to catabolize or build new proteins that make up body structures such as muscles and bones. The next one is the responsiveness, and responsiveness is the body's ability to detect and respond to changes. Now, for example, an increase in body temperature during a fever represents a change in the internal environment, and turning your head towards the sound of of brakes is a response to a change in the external environment. Now, the external environment means which is outside the body. And this changes helps us to prepare the body for the potential threat. Now, different cells in the body responds to the environmental changes in characteristics way. Now, the nerve cells responds by generating electrical signals known as the nerve impulse, and the muscle cells respond by contracting, which generates force to move body part. Now, the next one is the movement, and this includes motion of the whole body, individual organs, single cells, and even tiny structures inside cells. For example, the coordinated action of leg muscles moves our whole body from one place to another, while and when we walk or run. Now, after we eat a meal that contains fats, our gallbladder contracts and releases biles into the gastrointestinal tract to help digest them. Now, when a body tissue is damaged or infected, certain white blood cells moves from the bloodstream into the affected tissue to help clean up and repair the area. The next one is the growth, and growth is an increase in body size that results from an increase in the size of existing cells, an increase in the number of cells, or both. In addition, we can say that a tissue sometimes increases in size because the amount of material between cells increases. In a growing bone, for example, if we take in a growing bone, mineral deposits accumulate between bone cells, causing the bone to grow in length and width. Now, the next one is the differentiation, and differentiation is the development of cell from an unspecialized to a specialized state. The precursor cells which can divide and give rise to cells that undergo differentiation are known as stem cells. And the next one, if we see, is the reproduction, and reproduction is formation of new cells for tissue growth, repair, or replacement, and the production of a new individual. So in human, the former process, which is the formation of new cells for tissue growth, repair, or replacement, occurs continuously throughout the life, which continues from one generation to the next through the later process, which is the production of new individuals, and the fertilization of an ovum by a sperm cell. So these are the questions which often comes through this part of often comes in every exam which you appear. So there will be some definitions that is about metabolism, responsiveness, then the movement, growth, differentiation, and reproduction. So the next one, which we will be discussing here, is that of the homeostasis, and we can say that homeostasis is the condition of equilibrium in the body's internal environment due to the constant interaction of the body's many regulatory processes. Now, homeostasis is a dynamic condition. And now, in response to changing condition, the body's equilibrium can shift among points in a narrow range, but is compatible with maintaining life. So we will be next moving on to some homeostasis and the body fluids. Now, an important aspect of homeostasis is maintaining the volume and composition of body fluid. Dilute watery solutions containing, and this body fluids is, it is a dilute watery solutions containing dissolved chemicals that are found inside cells as well as surrounding them. Now, the fluid within the cell is known as the intercellular fluid and is abbreviated as the ICF, that is the intracellular fluid. And you can say the fluid outside the body, which is outside the which is outside the body cells, is termed as the extracellular fluid and is abbreviated as the ECF. Now, the ECF that fills the narrow space between cells of tissues is known as the interstitial fluid. And as we move with our study with this anatomy and physiology study, we will learn that the ECF differs depending on where it occurs in the body. Now, if we take a few examples, like the ECF within blood vessels is termed as the blood plasma. Now, within lymphatic vessels, it is called the lymph. In and around the brain and spinal cord, it is known as the cerebrospinal fluid, which you will often see as an abbreviation as CSF. And in joints, it is referred to as the synovial fluid, and the ECF in the eyes is called as the aqueous humor and vitreous humor. So the next slide which we will be discussing here about is the control of homeostasis. Now, the control of homeostasis, the control of homeostasis is we'll be discussing in some few points. So we can say that homeostasis in the human body is continually being disturbed. Now, some disruption comes from the external environment in the form of physical assault, such as the intense heat of a hot summer day, or a lack of enough oxygen for that for a run, for a 2-mile run. If you run, there will be a lack of oxygen. So these conditions will disrupt the homeostatic balance. Now, Other disruption originate in the internal environment, such as the blood glucose level that falls too low when you skip breakfast. Now, homeostatic imbalances may also occur due to physiological stress in our social environment. The demand of work and school, for example, now the stress also disrupts the homeostatic imbalances. In most cases, the disruption of homeostatic is mild and temporary, and the responses of body cells quickly restore balance in the internal environment. However, in some cases, the disruption of homeostasis may be intense and prolonged, as we can say, as in case of poisoning. Now, overexposure to the temperature extremes and severe infections or major surgery. Now, these conditions will lead to prolonged disruption of homeostasis. Now, fortunately, the body has many regulating systems that can usually bring the internal environment back into balance. Now, most often, the nervous system and the endocrine system working together or independently provide the need corrective measures to balance the this to balance this homeostasis. Now the nervous system regulates homeostasis by sending electrical signals known as the nerve impulse to organs that can counteract changes from the balanced state. And the endocrine system includes many glands that secretes messenger molecules called the hormones into the blood. So this is all about the control of homeostasis. Now we'll be moving on to the feedback system. So if we come here, we'll be giving you some brief introduction to the feedback system. So we can say that the body can regulate its internal environment through many feedback systems. A feedback system or a feedback loop is a cycle of events in which the status of a body condition is monitored, evaluated, changed, remonitored, and re-evaluated, and so on. Now, each monitored variable, such as the body temperature, blood pressure, or the blood glucose level, is termed as a controlled condition. Any disruption that changes a controlled condition is called a stimulus. Now, you can often have a question in your exam purpose that what is a stimulus? So the answer is that the condition, the controlled conditions, any disruption to this controlled condition is is known as the stimulus. Now, if we move on to some important terminology that will come, first one is a receptor. Now, a receptor is a body structure that monitors changes in a controlled condition and sends input to a control center. Now, this pathway is called an afferent pathway. That is, since the information flows towards the control center, and now typically the input is in the form of nerve impulse or chemical signals. Now, for example, certain nerve endings in the skin senses temperature and can detect changes, such as a dramatic drop in temperature. Now, the next one is a control center. The control center in a body, for example, the brain sets the range of values within which a controlled condition should be maintained. That is, the brain, have a set point which that set point that are that a body that the body should maintain. Now the condition that the condition that a body should maintain. Now evaluate, and the brain also evaluates the inputs it receives from the receptors and generates outputs commands when they are needed. Now output from the control center typically occurs as nerve impulse or hormones or other chemical signals. Now this pathway is called an efferent pathway. Since this is called an efferent pathway, since the information flows away from the control center. Now, in our skin, in our skin temperature, for example, if we take our skin temperature, the brain acts as a control center, receiving nerve impulses from the skin receptors and generating nerve impulses as output. Now, the next one is the effector. Now, an effector is a body structure that receives output from the control center and produces a response or effect that changes the controlled condition. And now, nearly every organ or tissue in the body can behave as an effector. Now, when our body temperature drops sharply, our brain sends an impulse to the skeletal muscle to the skeletal muscle that and the result is shivering, which generates heat and raises our body temperature. Now, a group of receptor and effector communicating with their control centers forms a feedback system that can regulate a controlled condition in the body's internal environment. In a feedback system, the response of the system feedback information to change the controlled condition in some way, either either negating it, that is a negative feedback system, or enhancing it, that is a positive feedback system. So here is, what is the negative feedback system, and we can say a negative feedback system, receives a change in a controlled condition. Now consider a regulation of blood pressure. We consider the regulation of blood pressure. Now, blood pressure is the force exerted by blood as it presses against the wall of the blood vessel. Now, when the when the heart beats faster or harder, the blood pressure increases. If some internal or external stimulus causes blood pressure to rise, the following sequence of events will occur. First, the baroreceptors, the pressure sensitive nerve cells located in the walls of certain blood cells detect the high the high pressure. The baroreceptors sends nerve impulses to the brain, which interprets the impulses and responds by sending nerve impulses to the heart and blood vessels. Now the heart rate decreases and blood vessels dilate, which causes the blood pressure to decrease. This sequence of events quickly return the control condition, that is a blood pressure, to normal. The homeostasis is restored. So from the elevation of BP, how the sequence, some sequential changes helps the blood pressure to return to normal. Now, we have to notice that the activity of the effector causes blood pressure to drop, a result that negates the original stimulus. This is why it is called a negative feedback system. Now, in the next slide, we'll be moving on to the positive feedback system. Now, unlike a negative feedback system, a positive feedback system tends to strengthen or reinforce a change in one of the body's controlled condition. Now, in a positive feedback system, the response affects the controlled condition differentially than in a negative feedback system. Now, the control center still provides commands to the effector, but this time the effector produces a physiological response that adds to or reinforce the initial change in the controlled condition. Now, the action of the positive feedback system continues until it is interrupted by some mechanism. Now, we can take an example like normal childbirth provides a good example for the positive feedback system, and the first contraction of labor pushes part of the fetus into the cervix. The lowest part, it is the lowest part of the uterus, which opens into the vagina. And then stretch sensitive nerve cells monitor the amount of stretching of the cervix. As the stretching increases, they send more nerve impulse to the brain, which in turn releases the hormone oxytocin into the blood. Now, oxytocin causes muscles in the wall of the uterus to contract even more forcefully. The contraction pushes the fetus further down the uterus, which stretches the cervix even more. The cycle of stretching, hormone release, and ever stronger contraction is interrupted only by the birth of the baby. Then stretching of the cervix it ceases, and oxytocin is no longer released. So these are some questions which will come across, in your exams. First, you have to learn, or we have to know what is the full form of the ICF and the ECF. Then, what is the ECF of the eyes are called. The ECF of the blood vessel, the lymph vessel is termed as. Then the ECF around the, the brain, in and around the brain and spinal cord is termed as. And what is the, what is the full form of the CSF, as I've already said this. Then we have to learn some, we have to know some basic terminology, that is what is receptor, what is effector. And finally there will be two most important question, that is, what is to explain the negative feedback system with examples and the positive feedback system with examples. Now we'll be moving on to the homeostatic imbalances. Now we have seen that homeostasis is defined as a condition in which the body's internal environment remains relatively stable. Now the body's ability to maintain homeostasis gives its tremendous healing, power, its tremendous healing power and a remarkable resistance to abuse. The physiological process responsible for maintaining homeostasis are in large part also responsible for our good health. Now, for most people, we can see that lifelong good health is not something that happens effortlessly. Now, the many factors in this balance called health include the, include the some of the factors which are the environment and our own behavior, then our genetic makeup, then the air we breathe, the food we eat, and even the thoughts we think. And the way we live our life can either support or interfere with our body's ability to maintain homeostasis and recover from the inevitable stress that life throws our way. In, every day there is some stress which lives throw in our way. So many diseases are the result of years of poor health behavior that interferes our body's natural drive to maintain homeostasis. Now, an obvious example, if we can take an is smoking related illness. The smoking tobacco causes, it exposes sensitive lung tissue to a, to a multitude of chemical that causes cancer and damage the lungs ability to repair itself. Now, because diseases such as that of the lung cancer are difficult to treat and are very rarely cured, it is much wiser to quit smoking, or we can say to never start smoking, than to hope a doctor can fix us once, once we are diagnosed with a lungs disease. Now, developing a lifestyle that works with rather than against our body homeostatic process helps us to maximize our personal potential from optimal health and well-being. Now, as long as all of our body controlled, controlled conditions remains within certain narrow limits, body cells functions efficiently. Now, homeostasis is maintained and the body stays healthy. Now, should one or more components of the body lose their ability to contribute to homeostasis, however, the normal balance among all of body's processes may be, disrupted. Now, if a body's imbalance is moderate, a disorder or disease may occur. and if it and and this disease or disorder may lead to death. Now, a disorder is an abnormality of structure or function, and disease is a more specific term for an illness characterized by a recognizable set of signs and symptoms. Now, a local disease affects one part or a limited or region of the body. For example, if you take a sinus infection, and a systemic disease infects either the entire body or several parts of it. And for example, if we take influenza, now disease alter body's structure and functions in characteristics way. Now, a person with a disease may experience symptoms, subjective change. Symptoms is a subjective change in body function that are not apparent to an observer. Now, for example, example of a symptom are a headache, nausea, and anxiety. And objective changes that a clinician can observe and measure are called signs. Now, signs of disease can be either anatomical, such as swelling or a rash, or physiological, that is high that is fever, high blood pressure, or paralysis. Now, the scientists in science that have discovered some terminology, and we can say that the science that deals with why, when, and where disease occur and how they are transmitted among individuals in a community is known as the epidemiology. And pharmacology is another term, which is the science that deals with the effect and use of drugs in the treatment of disease. So to conclude this lecture, we can say that the students, after this lecture have learned about some basic life process, that is the metabolism, the responsiveness, the movement, the growth, differentiation, reproduction. Then they have learned about the homeostasis. What is the term homeostasis mean? Then how to control homeostasis. Then the feedback systems, that is the negative feedback system and the positive feedback system, and the homeostatic imbalances with some examples of it. So these are the set of questions that you will also find. First, what is a disease? Then to take what is a disorder? This is the definition of this. There's a very thin line uh, between a disease and a disorder. Then, what we mean by the terms symptoms, signs, symptoms, and what are the what do you mean by the epidemiology and pharmacology? So this was the basic introduction to the uh, basic life processes, and we can say that after this class, the student have learned many things about life, basic life processes. So we'll be meeting you in the next class with a new chapter. So thank you for your attention in this class.